That was President Cyril Ramaphosa. Well, to discuss the visit by the French President to South Africa, I'm joined now by Dr Philani Mthembu, Executive Director of the Institute for Global Dialogue. Good evening, Doctor, and thank you so much for your time. Listening to the speeches that both the presidents have made at the University of Pretoria this evening, it seems they're very much on the same page. A real ally in France, it seems we have, in terms of getting a regulated price, better access to vaccines, and also to support our own vaccine production here in Africa. It sounds fantastic. How significant do you think this visit has been?
Well, thanks for having me. I think it is quite significant because what we shouldn't forget is that the reason we are discussing these matters, the reason why the French president is here, the reason why the Minister of Health from Germany was also here, is because South Africa has been pushing the international community towards this type of commitment. It's been galvanizing support within Africa. It's been galvanizing support within the global South, but also within the global North. And finally, we are getting some momentum in terms of countries hearing the appeal that has been coming from South Africa and India in pushing for a waiver on the TRIPS agreement.
It comes at an interesting time because there's a lot of discussion around access to vaccines and the waiver of these intellectual property rights, but a broader context perhaps of we're hearing apologies from European countries for what has happened in Rwanda. We're hearing begging of forgiveness from Germany for atrocities committed in Namibia. On a more broad level, is there a change of tone, an acknowledgement that wrongs have to be righted now?
Well, President Macron has sort of positioned himself as somebody who's trying to reset relations with Africa, to sort of break away with the past Francophilic policy within the continent, where France essentially dominated its former colonizers. We're seeing, of course, the apology from Germany. But I think it's important that whilst those types of gestures are very much welcome within the continent, it also must be understood that they're coming within a broader context of greater competition within Africa. So you've been seeing a real courtship of the African continent over the past few years with strategic players trying to get a greater footprint in Africa, whether it is China, whether it is the EU, whether it is Turkey. A whole range of countries have been courting Africa. And what we're seeing now is essentially an acknowledgement, even from the European partners, that it is important to address those historical injustices, because as long as they are not addressed, they present a barrier to greater political and economic cooperation with the continent.
All these are great sentiments and wonderful support, and it's good to see. How much progress do you think will realistically be made? We heard President Ramaphosa making an appeal to big pharmaceutical companies to come to the party, citing how they had to do that when it came to HIV and AIDS treatments. Do you think that these governments together will have the muscle to put pressure on Big Pharma?
Well, they really have to. I mean, this is exactly what the South African government has been pushing for. Many of these pharmaceutical companies are based in the global north, and it is them that need to actually change their position. So by gaining support for the proposal within the countries of the G7, within the G20, by having that show of unity between Germany and France in leading some of these European initiatives, what we're basically saying, at least from the South African counterparts, is really putting pressure on the governments of the global north to put pressure on pharmaceutical companies that are based within their jurisdictions to really hear the voices of the global south. And initially, this is not something that was welcome in terms of the calls from South Africa and India, but it is gradually gaining traction. And it's not only gaining traction because it's supported by the state actors in those particular countries. I think what countries like South Africa and India have done well is to communicate their message very clearly, and thereby gaining support among civil society actors within Europe and within the US to hear what the Global South is saying. So that combined pressure should yield some results. But, you know, from what President Macron was also saying earlier, is that the likelihood of actually seeing some of the results of this waiver, you're talking about 2 or 3 years down the line. But nonetheless, besides that, I think the President Ramaphosa was very clear that irrespective of how long it takes, this is a principled matter. We are facing a global pandemic. We have to take these measures in order to increase the production capacity. Because if we don't do that, you're just going to have more variants coming. Yeah. It will not help European and the US in order to just vaccinate their own populations and leave the rest of the world unvaccinated, because then new strains will come, and we don't know how those new strains are going to react to the existing vaccines.
Yeah, one unexpected benefit might be global unity around health access from this pandemic. And thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. That was Dr. Philani Mthembu, Executive Director of the Institute for a Global Dialogue.